So you're trying to intimidate me? Acting like a bully. You're trying to get under my skin. My patience is wearing thin. And you're taunting me! And you're taunting me! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it right now! Stop it! Stop it right now!
Hey, everybody. This is American Jesus, and welcome to Atheistic Recovery. You can also might find me as John B, Johnny B, that awesome guy, and these are my opinions. Oh, and in the past I was Bruce Wayne, not Batman, just the millionaire, not anybody impressive. But these are my opinions. Today we're going to be talking about a little story that came out at the turn of the last century. The story is called The Gift of the Magi. We're going to go ahead, we're going to read it, so we're going to have a little story time today. Then we're going to have a little discussion, or I'm going to have a little discussion about kind of what I took away from this story and what this story means to me. But before I get into the actual reading of the story, it's a short story, so you may have to bear with me on that, or you won't have to bear. It's short story. Anywho, the story was written by William Sidney Porter, otherwise known as O. Henry. Yeah, the story was initially published in the New York Sunday World, a newspaper that was on December 10th of 1905, according to Wikipedia. It was first published in book form in the O. Henry Anthology. That's a collection of stories. The 4 million. So a couple things I wanted to point out before we read this story to give it context. In 1905, social status was very important. It was basically how you survived, how you found work. There wasn't an internet that you could go on and do a job search. You found out jobs from the people that you knew, and it was a different time. So you're going to see a lot in this story about things that may seem a little bit surface, shallow, and materialistic, but I wouldn't judge this couple too harshly. You know, we had much more of a class system in place than we do now. And there were a lot of ways to reaffirm your class system. Another thing is that this was pre-feminism. So a lot of things that you're going to hear in this were before political correctness, before that idea. And I think that it's probably fairly unfair to blame O. Henry for having a vocabulary that reflected the time that he lived, seeing as how he died really before feminism even got started. Also, that this was pre-New Deal. This was actually pre-Depression. This was pre a lot of stuff. It's really kind of hard to relate to the level of fear that people probably had about going broke and ending up on the streets. People were imprisoned for being homeless. And also, let's go ahead and point out, because there's some dollar amounts going around here, when you first hear how much Della has, you're going to probably go, wow, you can't buy much with that. But we also need to remember that at the time, $1 was actually worth around $25 to $29. So keep that in mind as we are reading this wonderful story by O. Henry entitled The Gift of the Magi. So here we go. $1.87, that was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent impetuation of parsimony that such close dealings implied. 3 times Della counted it, $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby couch and howl. So Della did it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the house is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home. A furnished flat at $8 per week. It did not exactly a beggar's description, but it certainly had the word on the lookout for the mendicancy squad. Okay, these are people who went around and arrested homeless people. In the vestibule below, which is where the boxes are when you walk in before you actually go to your own apartment, was a letter box into which no letter would go. An electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Didn't work. Also, appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dilham Young. The Dilham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity where its possessor had been paid $30 per week. I remember, $1 is equal to $29, so it's about $800 a week, minus not having to pay federal income tax, not having to pay FICA or Social Security. It's a pretty good amount of money. Now, when the income was shrunk to $20, they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with a powdered rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim's present. She had been saving every penny she could for months. With this result, $20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. There always are. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim, her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent planning for something nice for him, something fine and rare and sterling, something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. There was a pier glass between the window of the room. Perhaps you have seen a pier glass in an $8 flat. That's a mirror. A very thin and very agile person may, by observing his or her reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal strips, obtain a fairly accurate conception of his or her looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. Suddenly she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall its full length. Now, there were 2 possessions of James Dillingham Young in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the air shaft, Della would have let her hair hang out the window someday to dry, just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been a janitor with all of his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed just to see him pluck at his beard from envy. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her. And then she did it up again, nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood still, while a tear or two splashed on the worn carpet below. On went her old brown jacket. On went her old brown hat, With a whirl of skirts and with the brilliant sparkles still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door, down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Sofroni, hair goods of all kinds. One flight up, Della ran in and collected herself, panting. Madame, large, too white, chilly, hardly looked the Sofroni. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Madame. Take your hat off and let's have a sight at the looks of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. Give it to me quick, said Della, and the next hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hashed metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. There was no other like it in any other stores, and she had turned all of them inside out. It was platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone and not by meticulous ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that it must be Jim's. It was like him, quietness and value. The description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company. So basically, it's a really nice chain that he could show off to people. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly on account of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way a little to prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lighted the gas and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love, which is always a tremendous task, dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, loose, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. That's not good. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, carefully and critically. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? What could I do? With $1.87. At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della dabbled the fob chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door that he always entered. Then she heard his step on the stairway down the first flight, and she turned white for just a moment. She had a habit for saying little silent prayer about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, please God, make him think I'm still pretty. The door opened and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor fellow. He was only 22 and to be burdened with family. He needed a new overcoat and he was without gloves. Jim stopped inside the door, as immovable as a setter at the scent of quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor was it surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly, with the peculiar expression on his face. Della wriggled off the table and went to him. Jim, darling, she cried, don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you. You've cut off your hair. Jim asked laboriously, as if he had not arrived at the patent fact yet, even after the hardest mental labor. Cut it off and sold it, said Della. Don't you like me just as well anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I? Jim looked about the room curiously. You say the hair's gone, he said, with an air of almost idiocy. You needn't look for it, said Della. It's sold, I tell you. Sold and gone too. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered, she went on with sudden serious sweetness, but nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim? Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He unfolded his Della for 10 seconds, let us regard with discreet scrutiny the inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week or $1 million a year, what is the difference? A mathematician or a wit would give the wrong answer. The Magi brought valuable gifts, but that wasn't among them. This dark assertion will be illuminated upon later. So basically, they're getting close. And so the narrator is panning up while contemplating the gifts that the Magi's brought Jesus in the Bible and wondering their true value. Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it upon the table. Don't make any mistake, Della said, about me. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or shave or shampoo that could make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going a while at first. White fingers and nimble tore at the string and paper, and then an ecstatic scream of joy, and then, alas, a quick feminine change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate employment of all the comforting powers of the Lord of the Flat. For there lay the combs, the set of combs, side and back, that Della had worshipped long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure turquoise shells, with jewel rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers. But the tresses that should have adorned the coveted adornment were gone. But she hugged them to her bosom, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and a smile and say, "My hair grows fast, Jim." And then Della leaped up like a little singed cat and cried, "Oh, oh, oh, oh." Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly upon her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash within the reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," said he, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep them a while. They're too nice to use just at present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. And now suppose you put the chops on." The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wiser, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in case of duplication. And here I have lamely related to you an uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But And a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. O all who give and receive gifts, such as they are wisest. Everywhere they are wisest. They are the Magi. Wow. All right. So that is Gift of the Magi. I'm sure that took 27 minutes. And so this might be a little longer than I had planned because I still have a lot of stuff to go over. But I'll try to go over it pretty quickly and then kind of spend more time on the stuff I really want to talk about. So one of the things that should be pointed out is O. Henry is notorious for his ironic humor. He reminds us that living should not be a job, but an experience. There are several other stories that go around this time of year that are very similar to this, but I think that this one really hits home and in what Christmas is really all about. The one that came to mind was A Christmas Carol. Obviously, A Christmas Carol is also about a person who places monetary value over his connection with other people, and that his life has been sacrificed because of this belief that he has that monetary success can make up for everything else that he had lost. That's a completely different story about the fact that he was an orphan when he was a child, and we won't go into that. But let it not be said that this is not necessarily like the most original storyline, but there is something I think that sets it apart. The fact that it's humorous allows us to share an emotion with other people, to relate to other people and say, oh, hey, did you read that story, Gift of a Magi? It's funny, huh? You know? I laughed. So that's that. It's a very heavy concept, and the fact that he uses humor to get it across makes it a little bit easier to bear, because it's actually a very critical statement about the nature of socialization, society, and he's not really too much praising much of anything except for the relationship that these two people have. And it also reminds us to not try to make plans. The foolishness of making plans and of believing in fate. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, doesn't really matter, who cares? When it all comes out in the wash, what really ended up happening was something that would have been terrible if they had believed that that was going to happen, but the fact that it did happen, it was a terrible plan that bared fruit that was 100 times better than any plan that they could have come up with. Of course, it's narrative, which makes it easy to do that, but also, so the next thing I really wanted to focus on is what is the true meaning of giving? I wanted to go through a couple of reasons why people give gifts, especially during this time of year. One popular reason is to receive praise from the person who receives the gift. You want to give something to somebody so that they will go, oh, you're such a nice, kind person. Thank you so much. And thanks. That's good. And that's it. It's basically a way to feed one's own narcissism. Another way is to create indebtedness. If I give somebody a gift that's extremely valuable, I may be utilizing that in the future to show that the books aren't completely balanced. If the other individual buys into that whole concept. Once again, many ways to feed your ego in giving gifts. And to create envy, the ability to give expensive, lavish gifts, is something else that people utilize. So gifts can be given under very manipulative pretenses. I remember one year around Christmas, somebody gave me a gift, and it was probably around $200. And the man was literally a millionaire. And I didn't get him anything. I got him stuff at other times, and I had bought him things when I would go somewhere. I would pick up peanuts or whatever because he liked M&M peanuts. And honestly, I was going to get him something, but I worked for him, and I was planning on receiving a bonus, and I didn't get one. And so I had already spent the money. Like I spent $1,000 on a tablet for my sister, and this was back when I had money, and I spent like another like $300, $400 on a camera for my niece because I knew that they wanted them, and I didn't have any money left over to buy my boss a Christmas gift because I was really assuming that when he handed out bonuses at the company party, that one would be put in my hand just because every other company I worked for, even as a contractor, had given me a bonus. But, you know, he got me a nice little gift, and I was very grateful. I mean, I was very much like, it was very sweet, you know, the what he had chosen. But at the same time, months later, we were in this conversation, and he brought up the fact that I didn't buy him anything for Christmas. And I think I had bought him something for his birthday, and he had bought me something, maybe. I don't freaking know. You know, but the thing is that it didn't really even occur to me. I felt bad that I hadn't got him anything, but I really just didn't have any money left over because of, like I said, I'd made plans to have a bonus. But I didn't really care. You know, I was just like, fine, and I let it go, you know. I had a discussion with him, and it was so petty. But what I left there thinking about was, to him, it was like spending 50 cents. There was no sacrifice involved. You know, but the thing about this story that's so beautiful is that it reminds us that we give of ourselves. That a gift is not something you keep score of, and it's not motivated by any quid pro quo kind of, you know, Silence of the Lambs kind of thing. That gift giving basically has two good purposes that I've seen. One, you can provide a gift to somebody because they need it and you can provide it. You know, occasionally you see something like this where people will spend an exorbitant amount of money on somebody else because that person needs it and the other person has the ability to give it. That's great, especially if it's done anonymously so that there's no kind of lingering sense of obligation. That's beautiful. And I'm not talking about like, oh, dude, it's terrible. People are giving gifts for the wrong reasons. What I'm talking about is what's touching, is what's human. And to me, that's what giving gifts at Christmas is all about, is being human. And somehow it's turned into being evil. I'm just kidding. You know, but you watch this frickin' Black Friday, and you just want to go, no, you're not supposed to try to go out and find some cheap gift. And most of the times they're buying it for themselves. You know, we are lost. And it is the obligation of creators, of the creatives, you know, of O. Henry, to remind us what's missing. Because we all know, and we all feel like something's missing, and we go, oh, well, we don't have a relationship with God. No, that's not it. You know, it's a relationship with each other. That's why even Jesus spent most of his time talking about building a relationship with each other, not God. He talked about how you treated each other. And that's what this time of year is, a celebration of that. Is a celebration to remind us that what's important is how we treat one another. Right? How we treat one another. And how much each of us means to the other. You know, that is affection. That is showing affection. Affection is a very vulnerable feeling because it shows how much you need that other person. That's why people don't like it. That's why they'd rather go out and make a whole lot of money so they don't need anybody. Because needing somebody is scary. In this story, these people, Della and Jim, in the story, Jim talks about how he had all this prestige, how he was making $50,000 a year or close to it, and how it went down to $25,000 a year, and how he had business cards that had his long name on it. But now it was almost making fun of the fact that he was not making money anymore. That if people saw it, they would probably think that it was too much. You know, it's like one of those old comedians that would dress all kind of comically, but would have this long formal name. That was the joke. And Jim and Della felt like that they were jokes because they had placed so much importance on how they were perceived on their class. But they didn't. Because there's a part in the story where Jim's talking about the fact that here I am just Jim. No pretense. He doesn't even need to really have a name because it's not important. They're just two people having a relationship. That's it. Just relating to one another, just needing one another. They need each other more than they need anything else in the world. And that's what this story's about. They sacrifice. Jim sacrifices his heritage. That watch represents his family name, which, especially in 1905, was all you had, was your family name. If you were a man and you said, I'm so-and-so, son of so-and-so, it was like the goddamn Klingons. It wasn't who you were, it was where you came from. We've come a little bit on that. We've come somewhat on that, you know, but back then, that was it. That was everything. You passed that on to your son. That was your legacy. And he gave it away to buy her combs for her hair, which would make her be able to show off her trait, her symbol. See, for women, it was about being not just beauty, but it was about being kept, being well put together. You know, that's why when she cuts her hair, she equates herself to a stripper or a schoolboy who really has no ability to care for himself. In the 1900s, whether or not this was good, I don't even want to get into right now because it wasn't. For women, they were the people who took care of the home. And so the wife was a reflection of your home. And that was your job. And other people would be very critical and very snotty about that. And the fact that she had this long flowing hair, which is very difficult to take care of because I've had it. It's a pain in the butt, but it's a symbol. It's a symbol of her being a good wife, to her being a good wife in the eyes of her peers. And she gives it up to be a good wife in the eyes of her husband. And he does the same thing. See, they sacrifice themselves. They sacrifice each other's ego, their construct that they've created to show the world that they're worthy. They don't care about that anymore. God, when I cut my hair off, I was not a happy man. But I was like, I'm done with it. But it was still like it had been part of my life for 7 years. I can't imagine that this hair is so intricate into her. And she sees it as such a status symbol. And she says it makes her feel like she's the queen of Zimbabwe or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of a lot of sentimental value in her hair, but not as much as she has for her husband. She's willing to sacrifice that for her husband's social status. Because she's not really thinking about how her husband will enjoy it himself, like, oh, I've got a chain. Her husband needs things. He needs gloves. He needs a coat. She needs things. They need things. They don't need these two things. You know, they're not doing too well, and this is a complete waste of money. And it's made predominantly a waste of money by the fact that now neither of them can actually use the gifts. but they don't care. That brings me to my final question. What is joy? We all know the song. Joy to the earth, the world? Actually, I didn't call it earth back then. Joy to the world, the blah, la, cha. You know, we don't really care about the second verse, but this is a time for trying to create joy in the world. What is joy? There's 3 questions that really brings to mind. What is joy? Why is it important? And how do we find it? And how does this story show us how these 2 individuals found it? Joy, like every other emotion, is a neurochemical reaction. That neurochemical reaction is an evolutionary adaptation. As apes, which we are part of the great apes. That's why we love monkeys so much, even though monkeys technically aren't great apes, but we like chimpanzees too, until they get old and rip our face off. Orangutans, whatever. We technically are a great ape. If you noticed, there's a weird phenomenon for great apes. They congregate. Nobody has to teach them that. It's instinctual. Instinctual means that there's a mechanism in their biology that reinforces them to congregate around one another. And this is generally what we call being close or having a relationship that's rewarding. It's the opposite of being lonely. Lonely is the feeling when we haven't been around or felt connected to somebody in a while. You see, the protagonists of this story are not lonely. That's why they're not thinking of themselves, even though they're very poor and they've probably had to give up a lot. You know, she doesn't sell her hair and then go, well, I got $10, I could buy myself something. And I got $10, I can buy my husband something. No, because she's not miserable. She's poor and she's not miserable. And it wasn't her hair that made her not miserable. It was the fact that her life was filled with joy. And that joy was a derivative of her relationship with her husband. Because it wasn't shallow. Because it was about sacrifice and transparency. That's a nice story. Why is joy important? Why is it such a great feeling? I mean, we all know other great feelings. Sex feels great for like a microcosm of a second. Well, okay. If you're good, it's longer. I've been told. Back on point, you know, there are other feelings that we enjoy. Happiness, excitement, feeling safe. You know, there are other feelings that bring us pleasure, and these are all reinforcements that our brain gives us to help us stay alive. And human beings are very complex creatures. We weren't given claws. We weren't given freaking hard exoskeletons. We were given a brain. That's about it. Without our brain, we're done. We're food. And our brain is not just logical. It's got a lot of chemicals floating around in it. And those chemicals are what keep us alive. When our brain says, I don't know if this is the best course of action because, hey, you know, why do we have guilt over things that we do that are selfish? Most of us. Because our brain says, no, it actually is kind of important to have a community or a tribe or something that you're a part of. So you kind of don't want to screw all these people over because you'll depend on them because you're a freaking ape. And on your own, you're food. Regardless, you know, this is a beautiful story. It's a story of these 2 people that really discovered what is meaningful. At 22 years old, I mean, maybe he doesn't fully comprehend it, but at 22 years old, he's had this experience that now is like, why wasn't I should have been mad. I should have been, I mean, I gave away my watch, and then why didn't she tell me that she was going to buy me a chain or buy me something for my watch so I wouldn't get rid of it? Huh? Why wouldn't she tell me that? And she could say the same thing, you know. At least hint about, hey, I'm getting you something for your hair for Christmas. That would have changed the whole outcome of the story. So this lack of communication, waste of money. They're poor people. Like, yeah, her hair will grow out, but if you've ever grown hair out, it said it went to her freaking knees, and it was in good shape. We're talking like a decade. I don't care how fast your hair grows out. And I don't know if he can ever get his watch back. It's not the point. But you could be, if you were in a different household, you could be really upset about that. And furious. Like, now we have these two things that were extremely expensive. $21 for a freaking whatever. For whatever. $21 for a chain for his watch. Multiply $21 by 29. That's how much she paid. And then remember that not doing too well. He's only making, he's underneath what we would consider the poverty level. You could be very upset, or you could be very resentful. Think it's a cruel twist of fate. God has forsaken me. Of course, when you get to the end of the story, you understand that, or at least I do, Henry didn't really think too much about God or about the story of the Magi. Let's revisit that last paragraph. The Magi, as you know, were wise men. Okay? This bodes of Trumpism. When you have to point out the fact that people are wise, wonderfully wise men, which is the next line, probably because they're not. Who brought gifts to the babe in the manger? They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones. Yeah, we got a baby in a manger, and they bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh, not a house. And Lord knows what happens to this stuff. They never really talk about it. I mean, it's not like, how much gold was it? If it was a lot of gold, then, Joseph wouldn't have continued to be a carpenter, So they bring useless gifts. And they're kings. They could have done so much more. Of course, as we all know, they were actually sent there to find them so they could go back and tell Herod where he was so that he could kill them, as the story goes. So technically, they were scouts for assassins. They were not wise by any stretch of the imagination. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in case of duplication. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. He's saying that they are far wiser. That's actually what he says at the end. But in a last word to the wise of these days left, it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. Oh, all who give and receive gifts, such as they are wisest, everywhere they are wisest, they are the Magi. See, he's saying their giving was the gift. It asks you to understand that the gift is a representation or a construct, that the present, the tangible present, is a construct of a thought or a feeling that one cannot express without sacrificing something. The feeling that is being expressed is directly correlated to the sacrifice of the gift. Part of this story is about the benefits of being poor. Many of the stories that you see during Christmas are about the benefits of being poor. Every frickin' religion on the face of this planet and every philosopher has always warned us of the trap of having money because it corrupts. Midas turned his daughter into gold. That's another one. That's a whole nother podcast. But if you can afford to give your kid what he wants, give him what he wants. But I guarantee you, when he gets older and all that stuff's gone and it's turned to garbage and it's been thrown in the trash, he's going to remember what you sacrificed and how difficult it was. Because that is where the importance comes from. That is the importance of the gift. You can't have any meaning, and there's no meaning without suffering. I mean, that's what I think. But yeah, I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. I always loved Christmas. I'll say Merry Christmas. I hope you see Santa Claus. I hope you experience Christmas through a child's eye, whether it be a child that you have or the child that you were. I want to thank you guys for listening to the At Recovery podcast. I try to put these up on YouTube. I will definitely have this one up before Christmas because it would be much better. But I'm sure nobody will hear it because I have no subscribers. Probably because I talk way too long. If you're listening to this on YouTube, there should be some links in the description. You can go to Atheistic Recovery. That is my website. There you should find links to my other social media blah, blah, blahs. That's it. You guys have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I'm really going to try to push this off starting the first of the year. Like, subscribe, tell me what you want to hear about, comment, do all that stuff. And I will be really happy, and I'll walk around with a big smile on my face. And I might even do that if you don't do any of it, so don't feel too much pressure. And then tell all your friends that this is good, and you should listen to it, and you should write down all the stuff that you learned, and then you should apply them to your daily life. All right? Good. Been American Jesus, and you have yourself a wonderful, wonderful day.
And you're taunting me! And you're taunting me! Stop it, stop it, stop it! Stop it right now! Stop it! Stop it right now! I'm just a little kid. Other side is something big. Do you think that what you did would bring you back to this?